Hello and welcome to this webinar. Today we're going to talk about the concept of critical thinking and race-based approaches and how they come into play during the validation of computerized systems. This webinar is going to be more like explaining the right mindset. Because at the end of the day, everything that we do begins with a mindset. The question is if it is the right mindset or not. This webinar represents my views based on my knowledge and my experience. My name is Sara Levy, and I am an industrial and management engineer with more than 25 years of experience in the industry. I have worked for a variety of industries from oil and gas, telecommunications, software development, and for the past 16 years working in the life science industries. I was born in Caracas, Venezuela, and had the opportunity to live in the USA, Canada, and currently I live in Israel. I also had the opportunity to be as a speaker, attend as a speaker in 2 virtual conferences, one in 2020, Cell and Gene Therapy Virtual Conference, and in the Validation Week of 2021, April 2021, where I talk about the concept that we are going to see today. I am in the process of writing my first book. It goes slowly but surely. And the idea of that book is to present a more innovative approach, a more innovative thinking for validation activities, among other things. So what are we going to do today? Today we're going to go over basic concepts. Concepts that, in my opinion, underpin the right implementation and understanding of validation activities. And if we don't have that clear, validation of computerized systems may become uphill and overwhelming. Among the CXV lexicon, I choose 3: data, quality, and risk. And we're going to talk about each one of them within the regulatory framework. Then we're going to talk about data integrity and data quality. We are going to see, right, if we can use them interchangeably. Are they the same or they are different? Can we use the same set of metrics to measure them? We're going to talk about that too. We're going to see the difference, if any, between qualification and validation. And towards the end, we're going to talk about the CSV lifecycle as we know today, and what is the added value the CSA approach brings to the typical CSV lifecycle. Now, please take into account that CSA is not a new concept, it's not a new practice, it's just all about mindset. It's all about having the right approach towards our validation activities. This webinar is going to be very dynamic. From time to time, you're going to see me watching on my notes or taking a look on my note, because I want to make sure I do not forget everything that I have here to share with you. And you will see me, as you just did, making notes on my slides using my Apple Pencil and my whiteboard. So let's move on with, and let's begin this webinar with a quote. Long time ago, I had the opportunity to read a book, The Art of the War by the Suns. Among all the insights and all the quotes that I got from that book, there is one that grabbed my attention. Please read this carefully, and you will agree with me that it summarizes the foundations upon which critical thinking and race-based approach are built. It emphasizes the importance of understanding the why behind our decisions and the things we do. If we do not know who we are as an organization, if we don't understand our business processes or business unit, if we don't know who our customers are, and in this case can be the regulatory bodies and the population we would like to serve, how can we apply risk-based and critical thinking approaches in our processes, in our activities? So keep that in mind. And let's begin with the first concept, quality. In regulated industries, we cannot define quality with the same mindset we do in other industries, where the look and feel will play a very important role in defining the quality attributes of a product or a service. Quality is a very vague and subjective concept, and is based on individual needs and values. Now, can we use the same approach to define quality in a regulatory framework? For me, everything begins with a very basic premise, and is that patients cannot see quality. Patients, and so do we as patients, cannot discern the quality of a medicine or a product. We need to trust the quality of that medicine or that product, and that they will do exactly what they are meant to do, no more and not less. From here, we understand that organizations need to define very specific quality attributes that should be aligned with the regulation they need to meet and the treatment they would like to provide, and measure those quality attributes constantly to make the determination that they meet the safety and efficacy criteria of the medicine or the product. If we want to make our way to our customers, or to our patients, better say, we need to have third-party bodies coming into our facilities, checking our processes, checking our systems, understanding the environment on which we produce our medicine or products, okay, and making the determination if those products or medicines meet the safety and efficacy criteria. So we understand that they are going to come and audit our data. So we are going to tell our story to these third-party bodies using our data, the data we generate. So we talk about data. Let's define data in the regulatory framework. Data. Almost everything that we do generates data. If we would like to show who we are, we need to show data. If we would like to demonstrate what we do, we need to show data. But it's not about only showing data. We need to demonstrate that that data is trustworthy, is reliable, and is based on accurate, validated, and documented results. Because decisions are made based on data, we need to trust the data we receive, and others need to trust the data and have confidence in the data we share. Data can be a very vague concept, but we need to know how to get value out of the data and how to get data that is of quality. And we're going to talk about that later in the presentation. And allow me to use the quote that you see on the screen to complement the definition of data. Without data, you are just another person with an opinion. That means that whatever I say, whatever I conclude, whatever decisions I make should be based in accurate, validated, and documented results. You can have data without information, but you cannot have information without data. That means that at some point, the data we produce or generate as organizations will become information. And upon that information, we are going to make our decisions. Now, keep in mind that the better the data we collect, the better the quality of the data we collect, the better the decisions we are going to make. Anyone can have data, but not everyone can read data. From here, we understand the emphasis the regulatory bodies put on the knowledge, on qualification and training of people behind critical or any GXP activity. If I don't have the right knowledge, I will not be able to make the right decisions as far as I have, of course, the right data. So everything here is summarized, okay, on my ability to demonstrate the integrity of the data that I present. So data without integrity is just numbers. That means that if I'm unable to demonstrate the integrity and truthworthiness of the data that I present and that I use to tell my story and to base my decisions upon, then that data becomes useless. I cannot use that data. I cannot make decisions upon that data. And last but not least, it is not because I said so. is because I was able to prove so. And this denotes action, right? Objectively documented actions. Now, organizations produce data all the time. They produce huge amounts of data, but not all the data is useful. I don't need to use all that data that I produce as an organization. So I need to understand my processes to be able to identify critical data assets. In order to do so, we can classify our data in three main areas. Regulated data is that data that I have to keep, in my main customer, if we can say that, are the regulatory bodies, right? And this is going to make the determination of quality, safety, and efficacy, all right? Then I have operational data. This is what I want to keep, And this is mostly business-oriented data that will serve me to improve my processes. As I am improving my processes and improving the quality of the medicines or the product that I produce. And for regulatory bodies, this is equally important. They want to see that we know our processes good enough to be able to improve those processes, and in that way, improving the quality of the product that we provide to our patients. And data that is unnecessary, that is data that has no impact on processes or safety and efficacy criteria, is data that we don't need, and we don't need to control that data either. So let's now see how data evolves in every transaction. So everything begins at this level, raw data. Raw data are outputs generated by humans or systems that are represented as they were captured. There is no calculation, there is no processing of that data. And at that level, data has no meaning. I don't understand, I don't know what my data is telling me. So I need to take that raw data and transform the raw data into information. So once I do that, once I transform data into information, I may understand what the data is telling me, which direction the data is taking, which result do I have. But it's important also that we have the associated metadata, because that's the only way we can put the information into the right context. And metadata is data about data, is all those parameters or all those attributes of the data that will provide me the means to establish the required traceability of every transaction. And keep in mind that traceability is a mandatory requirement as well. Then I have the information. So I am able to make decisions. I am able to make conclusions. But if I don't have the right knowledge, if I don't have the expertise and the qualification to do so, I may take decisions. But the question is, if those are the right decisions. So I have to have the knowledge, the expertise, the training needed to make sound decisions that are right. But it also going to depend on the type of information that I have and the type of data that I collect. So everything is connected to everything. So, and wisdom comes with the age, with experience. And please bear with me as I take all this off. And let's talk about now how we demonstrate the integrity of the data that flows in every transaction. If you see here this pyramid, you see that the wider part of the pyramid points to this level of a big pyramid. And the reason why is because, in my opinion, sorry, raw data is not easily reproducible. Okay, we will need sometimes to make the whole test or the whole run to again produce raw data. So the information security controls should be placed at this level, because again, raw data is not easily reproducible, generally speaking. Here and here is where the decision making is happening. And of course, I need to preserve also the integrity of the information, the integrity of my result. But as far as I keep my raw data, this is easily reproducible. Now, how can I prove the integrity of everything that is happening here? For that, as we all know, regulatory bodies, or better say the MHRA, had put in place a set of metrics that will help me to measure or demonstrate the integrity of the data that is flowing here. And this is the typical core, all right? And all these metrics at the end of the day are also, and bear with me one more time, all right? All these metrics that we see here are also metadata. And it's the metadata that will help me to establish the integrity of every transaction that I make, okay? Every piece of data that I am producing, what is behind that data, the story behind that data. So let's see every one of them separately. All right, so attributable. Every transaction should be attributable to a person, sorry about that, to a person, to a time frame, into something. I need to be able to trace every piece of information, every transaction, to a who, to a when, and to for what. Data should be legible. And here, beyond the thermal paper that we all know, and that we need to photocopy that paper, I would like to talk about legacy systems. Sometimes data that is kept in legacy systems is still in its retention period, and as such, I need still to keep it. The life cycle of that data is still active, is still relevant. So if I upgrade, if I change those legacy systems to a better technology, to a better system, to a better version of that system, I need to make sure that I'm still able to read the data that was generated using the legacy systems. Contemporaneous. This is documenting my transactions in real time. Happens today, documenting today. Happens now, documenting now. Now, there are situations where contemporaneous documentation of transaction is not possible. So that's fine, that happens. As far as we take that scenario and make the appropriate justification that we will provide the rationale why I allowing myself to retrospectively document an activity. Complete. And here I would like to talk about the output. Keep in mind that outputs are a snapshot and do not necessarily represent the whole picture. That's why I need to make sure that I'm keeping the data that is in my computerized systems intact, because they will complement the picture or the result that I'm presenting in the output. I can have the whole picture. That's why we need to make sure that whatever is in the computerized system is secure, all right? Maybe calibration that I need to do prior to a testing or to a run, specific setups for the specific run. So all that information is not generally on the final output. So we need to keep that too. Original is referred to as the source of data or primary data, where the data was generated for the first time, the source of the data. And make sure that if I'm going to do a copy of that, should be a true copy of the data, of the original source. And accurate. Data should be free of errors, free of interpretations, should be relevant, and should be up to date. Right. Now let's talk about the way I see data integrity. When I define data integrity, I just separate it in two main areas: subjective and objective data integrity. Because at the end of the day, how can we measure the integrity of a data? How can we measure the integrity of a person? Those are vague and abstract values and concepts. So when we take the subjectiveness of the data integrity, we talk about organizational culture and values. We talk about employee personal values and the engagement the employees have on those specific values, on that specific culture of the organization. So in order to measure that, in order to enhance all that, we need the senior management or upper management involvement, okay, in promoting a quality culture, in promoting a data integrity culture, and promoting the creation of policies and procedures and training of the organization in all these values. Then, and only then, we are going to be able to measure, all right, the integrity of the data we present, because the organizational culture and values are going to be inherent in the way we produce and present our data. So in order to bring some objectiveness to this subjective concept, we use the metrics we talked about before that will provide me some sort of measurement, something tangible that I can measure and touch and understand the integrity of the data, and in that way, the inherent values of my organization. Because at the end of the day, remember, we always tell a story using our data. And the way we present the data, the way we collect our data will represent the cultural values and the organizational values as well, organizational culture towards data integrity. All right? Now let's talk about data integrity and data quality, as I said before. Data integrity is more about a degree, a way, okay, which data are complete, at which level, all right, data is complete, consistent, accurate, trustworthy, and reliable. And that I kept all these metrics throughout the retention period of that specific piece of data. Data quality is more about the state of the data, the quality, the inherent quality of the data that I'm collecting, all right? In order to collect the right data, I need to know my processes. I need to know my business units. I need to know my goals as an organization. And I need to know, what do I need to do? What do I need to meet in order to provide that product and that treatment to my patient, all right? So data quality and data integrity for me are two different concepts, right? The SMEs, or the way data integrity is assured, is by technical means at the application and infrastructure level. It's all about how I configure my systems to preserve the integrity of the data, or how do I design my manual process to ensure the integrity of the data that is written. And data quality is more provided by the business SME. It's more about the intended use of the data. It's more about the quality of the data we are collecting. That's why the SMEs of data integrity will always be, IT, QA, QA of GMP to provide the regulatory part, right? And of course, the validation SME. And those people will provide the means to ensure the data from a configuration and application level, infrastructure level. Data quality SMEs are more the business SMEs, all right? And they are going to provide, they are the one having ownership on the data. The validation team do not have ownership on the data. It's the business, because the business knows how to use the data to make the decision they need to make. So data integrity comes to answer the question, can I trust the data? Is my data reliable? Is my data trustworthy? Can I trust the data that I'm presenting? And data quality comes to answer the question, can I use the data? Can I use the data to make decisions? Can I use the data to make conclusions and to present my story to a third or second party? Oh, this is for me the difference between data integrity and data quality. Now let's see qualification and validation. And as I put it here, yes, it is qualification versus validation, because they do not share the same scope. They have different scopes and they have different approaches. I would like to explain each, taking as an example the baking processes, which is an exact science. So let's say we have a baker, and that baker would like to produce a recipe. In order to produce that recipe, he has to have the right ingredients, the right tools. They have to have that specific oven that he will have at this specific temperature in this specific room, right? So it's all the components and ingredients that I need to produce my recipe. So there is this back and forth of trials until I get to my optimal, okay, recipe. So I have qualified my recipe here at home, so to speak, right? Then when I take that recipe and put it on a larger scale with a lot of people in mass production, expecting that the cake or that I will produce the cake, obtaining the same exact results, then I'm talking about a process. I'm talking about an end-to-end process. And then we are talking about validation. I'm taking a qualified recipe and put it into its final environment with the final people, with the SOPs, with the required training, with the required tools, ovens, and temperature. And then when I put all these components together as an orchestra, then I'm talking about validation. So from here we conclude that validation is a process-oriented activity. It's an end-to-end process, whereas qualification is task-oriented, okay? It's functional-oriented. It's a task-oriented activity. And we can see that very clear here. So I have my system, so I have my peripheral devices. And when I put all this together as an isolated unit, I'm talking about qualification. But when I add training, when I add outputs and inputs, policies and procedures, storage on a specific media, when I put all this together under, okay, a secure infrastructure, and I press the play button, so to speak, I'm talking about validation, all right? And moreover, if we see the MHRA guidelines and we see this 6.19 clause, we're gonna see that also in these MHRA guidelines, the scope of each activity is different. And qualification is more about a functional verification of the system, whereas validation is more an end-to-end process where the system is going to reside in his real environment with the real people. So vendor qualifies and manufacturer validates, all right? Perfect. So now let's talk about risk. Okay, and the typical approach to risk is that I identify my threats and I assess my vulnerabilities, but there is something interesting here, okay? So I have my threat, but if I have no vulnerabilities, okay, if I have no vulnerabilities, then I'm not exposed to any risk, then I may live with those threats and I, okay, put them as a residual risk. I live with them. I learn how to live with them. But if I have threats, okay, and I do have vulnerabilities, okay, I do have vulnerabilities, then I'm exposed to a problem. I'm exposed to a risk situation here, and I need to mitigate that problem. So I assess my vulnerabilities, and then I identify how can I reduce the risk to which I am exposed to. Now, it's very important to keep in mind that it's very important that we know how to take commensurate mitigations to the risk that we find. And the only way to do that is understanding our processes, understanding the critical data assets in those processes, okay, and know what is the intended use of the data, and in that way, understanding where to put my resources, because the regulatory bodies also will look at our good allocation of resources. The better and we know our processes, the more we are going to be able to allocate resources in the right places. So it's paramount to understand the intended use of the data, okay, and which decisions are made based on that data. That will give me an indication, okay, of where my risks are and where the impact is, okay? So as we prioritize our risk reduction measures and we validate those mitigations, of course. But the bottom line and the basic thing here is to understand our critical information asset. And in that way, we're going to be able to provide better mitigations to risk, more commensurate mitigations to risk. And let me provide you with two basic premises when we talk about risk. First, risk is everywhere, all right? There is an inherent risk in everything that we do. What we need to do is to learn how to live with those risks. We need to learn how to identify those risks, how to identify how vulnerable we are to those risks and behave accordingly. And the second premise is that the purpose of risk management is to have a certain control of the future and is not to explain the past. That is why risk management or risk assessment will always serve a preventive approach. And regulatory bodies, when they come into our facilities, they will like to see that we behave with a preventive approach and not with a forensic approach. Forensic approach means a corrective mindset and not a preventive mindset. For example, in my opinion, audit trail will not serve a preventive approach, even though if I take them proactively as part of my batch release, I don't think audit trail will serve a preventive approach. And the reason why is because audit trails are after the fact situation, are post-mortem activities. I see the audit trail, I catch a problem, I catch a deviation, but it's after the fact. Something was done wrong uphill beforehand that led to that problem. So audit trail is more like a tool for the quality management systems to understand what happened and why that happened, and make, of course, the appropriate corrective action. Okay. And here, when I talk about risk management or risk assessment, sorry, I do more that with an information assurance approach. where I need to always keep the confidentiality of my data, the integrity of that data, and the availability of that data, of that information. And please think about medical records. I need to have those records always available when they are needed. And I need to keep the integrity of those records, and of course, the confidentiality of that information, because not everybody should be exposed to all the data. All right. So now let's summarize all the things that we have talked about up until now in terms of basic concepts and that underpin all the process. First, we need to understand our business goal. We need to understand the why behind our business, behind behind our organization, right? Then we are going to be able to understand our data. Which data are we producing? Okay, and we need to make sure that we are collecting the right data, and we are collecting data that is of quality. Think of a clinical trial database when that database is designed. If I don't design the database collecting the right clinical parameters with the right screening process, searching for the right population according to the treatment I would like to provide, then when I collect and take all that data and make my statistical analysis, I probably will not take good information. I will not take value out of all the things that I collect. So it's very important that we understand our goals, we understand the type of data, and we understand the quality of the data that we need to collect, okay? And then when we understand the intended use of our data and the quality attributes that we need to keep out of that data, then we're going to be able to understand where our risks are, because I'm going to be able to know what are my critical data assets. All right, this is very, very important. And then, of course, I need to keep the integrity of all the things that happen here, because I use the data to tell my story. And I need to demonstrate that I'm telling the story with data that is trustworthy and reliable. So let's talk now about the typical CSV lifecycle as we know it today. First, everything begins with the validation SME. The validation SME is that person that will take full responsibility of the validation of the system, and will take also, unfortunately, maybe all the responsibility if something goes wrong in operation. I am in disagreement with that, and I will explain you why after. Then we need to understand the level of risk. The level of risk will be provided based on the intended use of the system and the impact that system has on the safety and efficacy criteria. Provided that we work under the GAMP5 categorization, we categorize our system according to the categorization level, and we define the minimum deliverables required to demonstrate our validation process. We create the typical validation plan, and we create our functional user and functional requirements, which is based on the intended use of the system. And there comes the typical functional risk assessment. And the reason I'm zooming this in is because I personally against the functional risk assessment. I don't think this type of activity will bring any added value to the validation process, because repeatedly what I have seen is that people taking the user and functional requirements, taking all those requirements, placing those requirements in a beautiful table where I will analyze every requirement according to the probability of occurrence, impact, detectability, and so on, to make a mitigation where the mitigation is, it will be validated, it will be tested during validation. That's not a mitigation. A mitigation is an action. A mitigation is something that I change or improve to avoid an unwanted situation. That's a mitigation, all right? That's why I personally think that is too much energy invested in creating this document, and the added value is not commensurate, it's not proportional with the amount of effort put in creating that document and reviewing the document as well. Then we have the validation protocols, the validation summary report, or tell the story how the validation went, and the validated lifecycle, where all the change control processes, take place. Okay, so this is the typical CSV lifecycle. Now let's look at the added value the CSA approach will bring to all this CSV lifecycle. Keep in mind that I haven't said that this is wrong, but the way we approach it, that's what will make the big difference, right? So this is what you see here, is the added value of the CSA lifecycle, or the CSA approach to the current CSV lifecycle. First of all, we need to identify our validation team. And why is that important? Because it's no one-man show, because one-man show will lead to one-size validation. So the validation team should be the QA IT person, right? QA of GMP, IT, and of course, the validation SME that will bring all these people together, right? And this person should have the expertise to understand which questions to ask. I'm sorry, but I have missed one important SME here, which is the business, all right? We must have the business SME. Without the business, we cannot do validation. There is no validation possible if we don't have the business input, because the business is the one that is going to have ownership over the data. It is the only one knowing what is the intended use of the data the system generates. Perfect. So we have identified sorry about that, we haven't identified the validation team, right? And now we need to understand the system intended use and the data intended use. This is what will bring me the system criticality, and that will help me to design and tailor my validation approach. So I understand the system intended use, the system as a whole, right? What is the goal of that system? And then I also begin to understand what is the intended use of the data that system generates, which decisions are made based on that data. So when I know that, I am able to put that system into the right proportion, right? And behave accordingly, behave in a more commensurate and proportional way. And of course, in order to do that, we made the determination, we understand what is our regulated data, which are our operational data, and which data we don't need, we don't have to control. Okay, so all this will bring the system criticality, and I will be able now, as I said before, to tailor my validation approach. Then comes the typical GAMP organization, as we explained before, and afterwards, or in parallel, comes a very, very important step, which is the 21 CFR Part 11 gap analysis. And why is that important? For example, when we get off the shelf or even category 4 systems, typically the vendor will come and say that the system is fully Part 11 compliant. And they will show us the white paper that established, yeah, we are Part 11 compliant. Okay, so for me as a validation SME, I don't accept that. I need to take the system, I need to open the box and analyze the system. I need to understand how mature is my system from a configuration standpoint to meet the requirements of Part 11. So I I focus my attention on five areas of interest. First, deletion of files. I need to make sure that I'm not able to delete any data or any file, any summary, any result that comes out of the system. And here we need to take into account that we have data files, okay, data files, or we have database, right? When we are working on systems that are built upon databases, our life becomes easier, right? Because it's more difficult to manipulate the data, manipulate the results. Here, we need to make sure, and we need to put in place access restrictions to the place where the data resides, or those data files are stored. Then we need to understand the availability or maturity of the system to segregate duties, right? Because we need to avoid conflicts of interest. I had one opportunity where, as a validation SME, we established a configuration baseline on the QC analytical lab. And one of the things what we realized is that the QC supervisor was defined as the administrator of those systems. So he will have superpowers to change the configuration of the system. And this is a big no. You have right there a conflict of interest. So what we did, we take out all the administrative powers out of the QC lab, and we choose to put that on the IT department, especially when it comes to user management. Then we check the audit trail's capabilities. Do we have a robust audit trail? Or it's just user management, like log in, log out, and failing attempts? Or do we have a history log of transactions, of events happening within the system? Metadata. We need to make sure that we have all the metadata we need to make the appropriate traceability of those results, okay? And of course, the infrastructure where the system resides. And that may be local at the PC level, it may be on company servers or in the cloud. So that also will change my validation approach accordingly. And then we are going to have data integrity risk. As opposed to the typical CSV life cycle, I will focus my risk assessment on the integrity of the data that is produced and is processed in the system. I'm going to talk about the data life cycle, where the data is coming from. It's coming from validated system. It's coming out of a manual transaction. How I process the data within the system and where the data goes. So I take all this end-to-end, I map out my data transfers, I do a data process mapping, and I begin to understand blind spots or gaps in terms of data transfer, in which transactions or which activity may corrupt the integrity of my data. So I focus my risk assessment on data, on the intended use of the data, on the data lifecycle. And then after that, we need to provide the associated mitigations out of that gap analysis, all right? And we have procedural mitigations, and we have also technical mitigations. And keep in mind that procedural mitigation that comes in the form of SOPs, forms, procedures, policies, training, become more expensive in the long run, because I need to keep maintain those new SOPs. I need to provide training on an established frequency. I need to use more resources to keep that processes aligned, right? But if we talk about technical mitigations in the forms of system upgrade, in the form of a new version of those systems or new configuration on existing systems, then Then in the long run, it will be less expensive, less maintenance, less human effort there. And when it comes to data integrity on paper-based transactions, it's more difficult to prove the integrity of the data in the process when we use manual transaction, when we use paper-based transactions. Whereas when we introduce technology, when we work as a paperless, our ability to demonstrate that integrity is higher. Keep this in mind. We humans are the weakest link in any process, and we are prone to introduce error to those processes because we are humans, okay? So yeah, technology may introduce vulnerabilities, but as far as we know how to control those vulnerabilities, we are going to be on the safe side. And then comes the typical life cycle, typical workflow that we talked about before. So here, this area here is what is going to give me, this area here is what is going to give me the actual CSA approach. And you can conclude from all this that the CSA approach is mostly about knowing how to ask the right questions and when, right? How to talk with the business, how to understand the processes where the system comes into play or the system automates. What is the intended use of that data? Which decisions are made based on that data? So we as validation SMEs should be very, perspicacious or very, I won't say smart, but we have to know the right knowledge and the right approach to know which questions to ask. All right, that will what will make the huge difference in any validation process. And to summarize all that we have said before, everything begins with good understanding of our business goals and the customers we would like to serve. And pay attention that we have here two main customers. We have here, sorry about that, we have here the regulatory bodies, which their main product is the data we generate. And we have here the patients, which are more about trusting the medicines they take, trusting the quality of the medicines they take or the products they use. So we tell our story to our regulatory bodies using the data we generate. Then we understand the intended uses criticality of our system. We understand critical data assets. And only then we're going to be able to commensurate our decisions and to design the right validation approach. And as I said before, we map out our end-to-end process and we understand where in that workflow, what are our data blind spot, data transfer blind spot or gaps, we remediate, and this is going to provide the input, okay, to visualize where my threats are. When I map out my end-to-end process and I see the data life cycle, I am able to visualize where my threats in terms of information security are, and then I can behave accordingly. I can prioritize my risk, and of course, I need to validate those mitigations. So yeah, so here's where critical thinking is happening. Okay, which type of system do I have? Which type of data do I generate? Which decisions are made based on that data? Oh, okay, so I can understand where my critical data assets are, so I can understand where to put my effort because I know where my risks are. I understand where I am vulnerable in that workflow, and then I'm able to mitigate accordingly. That's critical thinking. Understanding the business, understanding the process, understanding the system that comes into play in that process, understanding that intended use. In that way, I can map out my critical data assets and behave accordingly. and make my decisions based on a risk-based approach. So this is summarizing all this that we have just set up until now. And I have to say a big thank you to everyone. You have my email in the slide. Feel free to send me any question that you may have out of this webinar. I will be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. And I hope I had planted some seeds here and there, and I will provoke, if that's the case, of course, for you to go to your organizations, begin to check your processes, all right, and begin to understand your data and understand your system in a way that you, okay, am I doing my validation right? What do I need to improve? So yes, I hope that I provide you some good insights and I planted some seeds there. Please feel free to send me any question that you may have and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you very much.